Welcome back to the podcast, guys. Today we are joined by Adrian, who is a experienced fractional COO for multiple different companies. Welcome to the podcast, Adrian. Maybe you can just start by telling us a bit about yourself and some of the companies that you're involved with.
I'm an operational person. I work at the moment as a fractional CEO for different companies in order to optimize their operations, introduce new technology platforms, make sure that they're adopted, which is usually a big problem, and generally work with the boards to align operations and humans in order to create growth. That's the sort of 10 seconds definition of what I'm doing. Now, with each company, I encounter different challenges, but I see also some general principles and ideas that can be applied from one company to another. And I say that my role, it's been forged over a sort of long period of time where I've had roles like head of innovation and strategy, CEO, but I started as a software engineer. I combined the technology stuff and the technology and technical acumen with what I learned about the application of it and the operations and what drives a company. What is the culture that a company has to have in order to create that sort of flywheel of growth.
When you first come into a new company in this fractional role, what are some of the first things that you look at to see, are they hitting KPIs and benchmarks, or maybe you strip out some things or give advice around some things? Like, what are some things that if somebody's listening to this, they could change tomorrow that would impact their business and help them grow?
Sure. First of all, I don't rip off anything from the beginning. I try to listen and understand. And I look at the patterns that I have learned about companies. And the first thing that I do is I try to understand what are the visible and invisible lines of communication. There's a lot of stuff going on in companies that it's not necessarily documented. There's a lot of that, what I call the sort of shadow influences and shadow lines of communication that have been established over a while. It's part of stuff that you do not detect in the room, but you see it when you apply things. You see it when the workload is becoming quite a burden or when things are changing. I look at those sort of lines and I try to understand the pattern of communication. Then I try to understand the whole company from 3 points of view: the organizational debt, which is around the processes and the system thinking, if it exists, all the documentation and everything else. Then I look at the tech debt, which should be aligned with the organizational debt, and I see if there are any sort of gaps. And in some companies, there's a proliferation of tech stacks and things. Usually that gives me some sort of indication around adoption. Everyone maybe has its own set of tools that they like to use because they've used it before or because they are very comfortable with that, and there is a little bit of control going on and all of that sort of stuff. And third, which is very important but very often undervalued, is the human debt, which is the difference, the gap between how things should work versus how the things do work because of, clarity or lack of, or not understanding the lines of communication, not understanding the lines of responsibility and stuff like this. I do a little bit of a gap analysis on all those three dimensions and try to see where those gaps are and how we could actually fill them in. Then I talk to the board about all of those things, and we look at ways in which we can actually fill in those gaps and try to understand how things should work. But we align those generally with metrics. So I do look at KPIs, as you said. In some companies, there are some OKRs, but I try to understand how reasonable those are. And are they actually understood? Are they transparent? Do people rely on them? Are they dynamic? Or either just set up for the next 2 years and nobody's looking at them again. I look at those things and I try to find from a board point of view and generally from a CEO point of view, which is usually the person I'm working with, what are some very clear, a short list of business metrics that they would like to achieve. And we work back from those to try to understand what we can put in place or what's missing in order to to hit those business metrics. And we also put everything into a sort of timestamp. When do we want to do that? By when we want to do that? So that's generally how I work.
Okay, extremely involved. What have you noticed have been some of the biggest challenges that the companies you're working with have faced over the last 12 months?
There are some areas where each company has struggled with. One of them is sort of weathering the economical storms, not understanding fully, what's happening in terms of different things, taxation and all sorts of other things like that. And the second one is ability to have the right people at the right time, hiring people and getting the right value from people and making sure that they get the right talent on board and get that sort of talent at the time when they need it. In companies where I used to work as a permanent person, I used to constantly look at the pool of talent when I needed it and when I didn't need it, just to be sure that I know what is the landscape of that talent and where can I find it the moment I need it. Because very often companies do grow in spurts. They do not grow necessarily linearly. And when they are in a sort of growth spurt, they need people there and then. And we all know that comes at the cost of money and time. The third thing that they encounter is some issues around funding and access to funds. When they have this sort of funds, there is also some issues around understanding the gap between their expectations, the stakeholders and shareholders' expectations and investors' expectations. And that's why I always say, and I've seen it on different boards, there should be a very strong connection between the investors and the executive team. And the executive team has to take the duty to take the investors with them on a journey because, they need the money now, but they might need the money also in 2 years' time. And preparation for that has to start right now.
Right.
So, the other thing that I see is this sort of proliferation of tools and technologies that can help with different things. If we look only at for instance, the marketing landscape, yes, there is a gentleman called Scott Brinker who does usually every year a sort of mapping of all the technologies that help with marketing. Well, it's very difficult to make any sort of sense out of that because there are so many. Sometimes the choice of a certain tool that they're using could be quite problematic. And third is this sort of fluidity of talent, the way they move from one company to another, and making sure that your vision and mission do keep people inside your company, and making sure that actually you value the people enough and you put them, they are your main asset in order to keep them, because we know what is the cost of losing some people and replacing this sort of people. It's usually very high. And if I would bring a sort of fifth dimension is this sort of AI that everyone talks about. Nobody really understands, or well, some people do, but there's still some sort of gaps of understanding of how it will affect the companies and in which ways. And how do you prepare for that? How do you prepare for this wave of changes that AI will bring?
Right. Okay. And are you noticing that it's affecting like how they might be acquiring clients, or maybe even if we want to pivot slightly to like how you might be acquiring clients? I imagine it's a lot of referrals and warm network stuff, but like walk me through what that looks like, maybe for yourself and for some of the companies that you're a part of.
I always liked to talk about value, no matter what is a technology that consolidates or pushes that value. So what is the technology behind that value? If you can actually show to your client that you will provide value through your services, yes, you are halfway through winning them. If you can't express that sort of value, or is a sort of value which is minimized by margins in that sort of values are not enough for a client to make a decision, then you're struggling. And that has been like this, no matter what technology was behind it. Obviously, what you see with AI, and I think it's quite interesting to look at AI and basically any other new technologies from a sort of 4 pillars framework, is that the first pillar, is there any sort of reduction in costs? Can we do what we're doing faster and at reduced cost? And that could be anything from reducing your resources that you're using, or making things faster, or using some tools that allow you to actually repeat and to actually make a shorter the cycle, the decision loop. So that's the first thing. The value is good, but increasingly through the pillars, it will go higher. So the second pillar is, can we actually make the operations optimized with the AI that we're using? And you have an increasing value in that sort of stuff. The third one is, can we actually get more insights by using it? And the fourth one, which is probably the holy grail, is, can we actually get new business? Can we create a moat by using that sort of technology? And if you think about it, this is not my thing. It's something that I've seen before. I think IBM has used it first time. But I think it's quite a way of framing the value of a certain technology in general, or AI in particular, in terms of how it will help a company through a timeline, and through a sort of increased value projection. And that's how I try to instill this sort of framework when I work with companies. You look at the immediate low hanging fruits, and then the ones which are a bit further.
Sure. And just, I guess, wrapping up, Adrian, like, if it's a question I like to ask because I'm always sort of surprised by the answer. If you could wave a magic wand currently over either the industry or maybe in one of the companies or in your own company, and you could solve a big problem just like that, what would that big problem be right now?
It's an interesting question because there isn't one problem. The problem which I see at the moment, which I think it will have a lot of effect in the future, is the acceleration of the technical capacity versus our ability behaviorally to keep up with that. And if there will be a way in which we can bring those together and align them a little bit more, I think we will be having better success at utilizing those technologies. But I think what's happening at the moment, there is a big gap between our ability to adopt them and the power and the acceleration of those technologies. And if I would have one, I'll bring those together a little bit more.
Okay, I like that. I've certainly never heard that answer to that question. I really appreciate that. That's a perfect way to wrap things up. If people are maybe listening and they want to connect with you, where can they go and how can they connect, Adrian?
Well, LinkedIn is probably the best place. I post regularly there so they can hear they can read my thoughts there, or they can, I love contrarian views. I like people to actually, no, you're not right. I enjoy that sort of discussions, but LinkedIn is probably the best place. And from there, they can contact me and we can start a discussion.
Perfect. Well, I'll make sure to leave links in the description, but thank you for coming on today, Adrian, and sharing some of your insights. Like I said, I haven't heard a lot of them, so I appreciate that. And thank you guys very much for watching. We'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.